Alarms were still echoing when Command opened the recovered message, and the first words hit like a punch. "They're here, but unseen." No one breathed, no one spoke, because everyone understood what that meant. Something was moving out there, something real, something close, and yet every scanner showed perfect emptiness. The patrol ship they found drifting was cold and silent, lights still glowing like life should be inside, but not a single footprint, not a mark, not even a fingerprint remained, as if the entire crew had been erased without a struggle, without a sound. The air inside felt heavy, like the walls remembered fear, like panic was still floating in the metal, and the only thing left running was that frozen screen repeating the same word again and again. Humanity. Slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat that shouldn't exist anymore. Officers whispered about old rumors, about the species that vanished a century ago, the species everyone laughed at, dismissed, buried in history as weak, primitive, powerless. But now every breath felt wrong because something powerful enough to empty a ship without a trace was nothing like weakness. Outside the windows, space looked too calm, too still, like a predator holding perfectly still in the dark, and the rescue team felt the hairs on their arms rise as the temperature dropped, the lights flickered, and the shadows stretched longer than they should, as if something massive had just passed between them and the stars. A technician tried to reboot the scanners, hands shaking, voice cracking, but the system didn't fail. It simply refused, like the technology itself was being overridden by a force older and stronger, and then a soft vibration trembled through the ship, low and deep, like engines humming somewhere close, but no engines were visible. The commander grabbed the railing, staring into empty space, eyes wide, heart racing, because he could feel it. Not see it, not hear it, but feel it, like a giant presence pressing against the hull, watching them, surrounding them, the way a storm surrounds a helpless traveler before the first strike. Someone whispered, "If they're here and we can't see them, what else can they do?" And that question hung in the air like smoke, filling every mind with a single terrifying truth. If a fleet could move unseen, it could strike unseen. The light suddenly died, every screen went black, every system shut down, and the ship fell into total darkness except for one flickering monitor that came back to life with a new message, written in calm, human text. "Do not run." And then the hull began to shake. The shaking grew harder, a deep grinding roar running through the metal like something enormous was scraping along the outside, and every person on board felt the floor tilt as if an invisible force was pushing the entire ship off its path. Panic burst in voices, hands grabbing railings, boots slipping, but before anyone could reach the controls they realized the truth. There were no controls left to reach, every panel was dead, every system frozen, and the ship was moving on its own. A cold blue glow began to pulse through the windows, not from stars or engines, but from a huge circular shape forming in the darkness, a ring of light bending space like a slow, silent whirlpool, and even though scanners were blind, every instinct screamed that something massive was approaching through that distortion. The commander tried to speak, but his voice failed when the hull temperature plunged, frosting over handrails and leaving white mist in every breath, a chill so sharp it felt like the air itself was being pulled away, like something was draining the energy from the ship and everyone inside it. Then a low vibration turned into a steady rhythm, like footsteps, heavy, slow, impossibly large footsteps, moving across the exterior, circling them, growing closer each second, and the crew stared at the ceiling as if a giant presence was standing right above their heads. A communications officer slammed her fists against a dead console, tears in her voice as she whispered that they were no longer drifting. They were being towed, dragged by a force strong enough to move a warship without a single visible beam or cable, as if an unseen hand had taken hold of them. The circular light outside stretched wider, bending stars around its edge, and for a brief moment a silhouette formed inside the glow, towering, angular, shaped like a ship but darker than space itself, its outline swallowing light instead of reflecting it, a void with sharp metallic edges that faded in and out like a ghost trying to take form. Fear tightened every chest when a soft hum flooded the bridge, not mechanical, not alien, but disturbingly familiar, almost like a human voice layered into a frequency too deep to understand, speaking a pattern that felt intentional, controlled, and close. The commander stepped toward the window, breath shaking, eyes locked on the forming shape, and managed only one trembling sentence. "This isn't an attack, it's a retrieval." And before anyone could question him, a violent jolt snapped through the ship, metal screamed, gravity vanished, and the entire crew was yanked upward into blinding white light as the unseen vessel finally revealed its first impossible move. Gravity slammed back without warning, hurling bodies onto a hard surface that wasn't the ship's floor, and a blinding white haze slowly cleared to reveal a massive chamber. Silent, metallic, and impossibly vast, like the inside of a moon carved into steel. The crew scrambled to their feet, breath shaking, uniforms coated in frost, and realized with horror that the ship was gone. They were standing alone on a platform suspended in midair, with no railings, no doors, only a bottomless drop into darkness below. A low hum vibrated through the chamber, steady and controlled, and as the light dimmed, enormous shapes began to materialize around them. Long, angular silhouettes that stretched into the shadows, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, forming silent rows like a sleeping army. The commander's voice cracked as he whispered that these weren't walls. They were ships, giant vessels bigger than anything the galaxy had ever built, each one coated in a strange black material that swallowed every glimmer of light, making them look like solid shadows suspended in nothing. A technician pointed toward the nearest hull, trembling, because symbols etched along its surface were unmistakably human. Earth language, Earth numerals, Earth markings. Yet every design was far beyond anything humanity was ever known to create, like technology that leapt centuries ahead in secret. Before anyone could process that impossible truth, a cold gust swept through the chamber, and a faint beam of light traced across the crew like a scanner, but not mechanical, not artificial. More like a living presence examining them, pausing on each heartbeat, weighing each breath, as if deciding who should exist and who shouldn't. Consoles flickered into existence around them, floating holograms showing star maps with routes marked in red, and every route pointed inward, not outward, toward council worlds, toward military hubs, toward the galaxy's core, suggesting a coordinated movement already underway. Panic rippled through the group as they realized these ghost ships were not arriving. They were staging, positioned like a silent fleet waiting for a single command, and whatever brought them here had planned this moment long before anyone noticed the missing patrol. Then, without warning, a voice echoed across the chamber, deep and clear, but unmistakably human, speaking from nowhere and everywhere at once, saying they had been gone for 100 years not because they were defeated, but because they were building what the galaxy feared most. The light surged bright, engines roared to life in unison, and every shadow ship began to awaken, leaving the crew frozen in terror as the voice spoke a final chilling line. "You were never the target, they were." And the platform beneath them suddenly dropped. The platform dropped only a few feet before locking in place with a violent jolt, leaving the crew crouched on their knees, hearts racing, breaths sharp and uneven, and in that frozen moment a new terror settled in. Not just the fear of death, but the fear of purpose, as if they had been brought here for a reason none of them were ready to face. The chamber darkened until only the ghost ships glowed with faint outlines, and that same human voice returned, colder now, telling them that humanity hadn't vanished out of weakness but out of choice, because the galaxy had judged them, restricted them, and finally threatened them, forcing a retreat that wasn't surrender but preparation. The commander felt his chest tighten as memories rushed back. Old history lessons, council broadcasts mocking Earth, treaties that labeled humans unstable, dangerous, untrustworthy, and suddenly the silence in the chamber felt like accusation, like the walls themselves were asking why anyone ever believed humanity would simply disappear. A young officer broke down, shaking, insisting the humans were peaceful, that they never sought war, but her voice cracked under the weight of uncertainty, because if these ships were truly human-built, then peace had not been the goal. Survival had, and whatever had driven this secret construction must have been darker and deeper than anyone ever admitted. The platform began to rotate slowly, revealing a massive window that opened into the void, and beyond it the crew saw something that stole every breath. Countless invisible distortions rippling across space, faint bends in starlight, each one marking a cloaked vessel already in motion, spreading toward every major world in the galaxy like a silent storm. The realization hit hard. This ghost fleet wasn't preparing to strike. It was already positioned, already advancing, already unstoppable, and they were standing in the heart of its command center, not as prisoners, but as witnesses to a decision made long before they were born. Doubt tore through the commander's mind as he wondered whether humanity had returned as protectors or executioners, whether the fleet was meant to be a warning or a sentence, and the crushing truth was that no one in this chamber had any power to change what was coming. The voice spoke again, softer now, almost mournful, saying the galaxy had crossed a line a century ago, one that condemned itself, and humanity had simply answered the verdict. Then a single spotlight fell onto a figure emerging from the shadows, a human figure wearing a frost-covered uniform with Earth insignia, eyes hollow, voice unsteady, whispering 4 words that shattered every certainty in the room. "We didn't choose this." And as he stepped forward, trembling, he added one more. "You did." The room trembled as the human figure stepped fully into the light, and before anyone could speak, the platform beneath their feet began to rise, carrying them upward toward a towering structure suspended in the center of the chamber. An enormous command core shaped like a black spire, pulsing with slow, heartbeat-like waves. The figure's voice grew steadier, colder, as he explained that the galaxy had not simply pushed humanity into exile. They had tried to erase them, launching a covert strike a century ago meant to wipe out every Terran colony in a single night, a plan hidden behind diplomatic lies and sealed records. The words hit like thunder, and the commander felt his breath stop as images flickered across hovering screens. Grainy footage of human outposts burning, ships collapsing into silence, desperate messages ignored by the Council, entire populations vanishing while the galaxy celebrated peace. The truth was larger than fear. Humanity hadn't returned to start a war. They had returned because one had already been waged against them, in secret, and the Ghost Fleet was built not out of ambition, but out of survival and rage held in silence for generations. As the platform reached the spire's midpoint, the walls around them unfurled like giant metallic petals, revealing a colossal panoramic view of space, and there, stretching far beyond sight, were thousands more distortions, each one a cloaked giant moving in perfect formation across star systems, already bypassing defenses, already invading sensor grids, already positioned within striking distance of worlds that had never considered themselves targets. A technician screamed as new data flooded the holograms, showing red markers blinking across Council maps. Power stations, military strongholds, communication hubs, all silently infiltrated by ships that left no trace, no signal, no warning, meaning the fleet wasn't preparing to attack. It was already inside the galaxy's most protected territories. The commander's stomach twisted as he realized the scale was beyond anything imaginable. This wasn't a counterattack, it was a takeover designed to shut down the galaxy in a single synchronized moment, leaving entire civilizations blind, helpless, and surrounded before they even knew humanity had returned. The human figure turned toward them, eyes glinting with something like sorrow and fury bound together, and he revealed the final blow. The Ghost Fleet wasn't controlled from this chamber. It was autonomous, pre-programmed decades ago, set into motion long before any living human could stop it, and the countdown had already begun. A low rumble echoed through the spire as massive engines roared to life, space outside rippling like boiling glass, and a new message flashed across every screen in stark, burning letters. Phase 1. Silence the stars. Then the chamber shook violently, alarms erupted, and one of the invisible ships uncloaked right beside them, its colossal hull turning toward their platform like a weapon taking aim. The colossal hull loomed so close it swallowed every star, its surface rippling with shifting black patterns like a living shadow, and the platform shuddered as if the ship's presence alone carried weight. A deep vibration rolled through the chamber, pushing against their chests, making every heartbeat feel louder, faster, more desperate, and for the first time the threat wasn't distant or hidden, it was right in front of them, awake and aware. The commander stepped forward instinctively, even though his legs trembled, because something primal told him that retreat was useless. Whatever controlled this fleet had already locked its focus on them, and there was no safety left, no escape, only collision. A beam of icy white light fired from the ship's surface, not an attack but a scanning pulse so powerful the air crackled, forcing the crew to shield their eyes as their bodies shook under its pressure, every cell feeling exposed, stripped, judged. The human figure shouted that the fleet was interpreting them as obstacles, unregistered life inside a restricted command zone, and if they didn't intervene, the system would erase them like debris in its path, because the autonomous protocol recognized nothing except mission priority. Panic broke into raw argument as officers demanded control, demanded answers, demanded a way to shut the system down, but the figure's voice cracked with a brutal truth. No living human had authority anymore. The fleet's command chain was locked to the past, bound to leaders long dead, and every second wasted brought the first strike closer. Outside the window, more ships uncloaked one by one, forming a massive wall of armored giants, engines glowing with silent fire, their formation tightening like a fist closing around a target, and the scale of the impending assault hit with crushing force. This wasn't a warning shot, this was the opening move of a galaxy-wide shutdown. The platform lurched upward again, racing toward the spire's peak, metal grinding, alarms wailing, and a hatch opened above them, revealing a control bridge bathed in red emergency light, filled with ancient consoles and flickering displays, human-built, but scarred, abandoned, frozen in time. The commander lunged toward it, driven by instinct rather than reason, because even the smallest chance to interfere was better than standing still while entire civilizations were about to go dark. As they reached the hatch, the ship beside them rotated, its massive core splitting open like a mechanical maw, gathering a swirling charge of blinding energy, aimed not at distant worlds, but directly at the command spire itself, ready to obliterate the chamber and everyone inside it to clear the fleet's path. The deck vibrated to a breaking point, lights flashed pure white, and in the last suspended second before the blast fired, a single console on the bridge flickered to life, displaying one impossible word, override. The single word, override, burned on the screen like a lifeline and a death sentence at the same time, and for one breathless moment the entire crew froze, because everyone understood what it meant. There was a way to interrupt the fleet, but whatever the command required would not be simple, safe, or survivable. The ship outside continued to charge its weapon, energy spiraling into a blazing core that shook the air with static, and the platform's metal frame groaned as if it could feel the countdown closing in, every second tightening around them like a noose. The commander lunged toward the console, fingers shaking as he wiped frost from the controls, but the screen shifted, revealing a new message that punched the breath from his lungs. Override requires human authority. One life TO reset command. The meaning hit like a blade. Someone had to manually link their biometric signature to the system, using a neural lock that would burn out the mind of whoever engaged it, a living sacrifice to seize control from the autonomous fleet. Voices broke into chaos, fear rising like fire, officers shouting that there had to be another way, that no mission could demand a life. But deep down everyone knew this fleet had been built on desperation, and desperate systems never offered clean choices. The human figure from the shadows stepped closer, his face hollow with guilt, and he confessed that the override was designed during the exile. Made for a moment when humanity had nothing left to lose, a final stopgap for a war they believed they wouldn't survive, and once activated, the fleet would either shut down or jump into full assault with no chance to reverse the outcome. A cold silence rippled through the chamber as the weight of that truth settled on every heart, and the commander felt his stomach twist because this wasn't just a choice about ships. It was a choice about billions of lives across the galaxy, innocent or guilty, friend or enemy, all hanging on a single irreversible action. The platform jolted violently as the weapon outside reached critical mass, its molten light spilling across the glass like a rising sun, and the alarm shifted into a piercing tone that meant the spire would be obliterated in seconds, leaving the fleet unchecked and unstoppable. The commander looked at his crew, faces pale, eyes wide, every breath trembling, and he knew there was no time left for debate, no chance to stall, because doing nothing was its own decision, one that guaranteed the fall of every world within reach. He placed his hand on the neural lock, the console flaring to life beneath his palm, and a voice, calm, synthetic, final, asked the question that would decide the fate of everything. Confirm sacrifice for command transfer? The chamber shook, the weapon outside fired its first blinding flare, and with the universe collapsing around him, the commander drew a single trembling breath and made his choice. The console accepted the commander's touch with a violent surge of light, and a shockwave ripped through his body, arching his spine as the neural lock clamped onto his mind like molten iron, dragging him into a blinding stream of data. His scream was swallowed by the roar of the charging weapon outside, and the entire spire lit up with cascading symbols, human code, command sequences, ancient protocols, racing faster than any living brain was meant to handle, flooding his thoughts with the weight of a century of hidden war. The Ghost Fleet reacted instantly, their cloaked hulls flashing with faint outlines as if stunned, engines faltering, formations wavering in silent confusion, and for the first time the unstoppable machines hesitated, caught between programmed orders and a new, living authority forcing its way into their core. The crew watched in horror as the commander's eyes glazed white, his body trembling, veins glowing with cold blue light pulsing from the neural lock, and every flicker of the consoles echoed his pain, because the override wasn't just extracting control, it was rewriting it, burning command directly into a human mind that was seconds from collapse. Outside, the charging ship faltered, its weapon sputtering, energy whipping across space in unstable arcs that tore cracks of lightning into the void, and the massive vessel tilted as though confused, its targeting systems locked in a desperate loop between annihilation and retreat. Alarms across the fleet erupted in unison, a deafening chorus that reverberated through the chamber as thousands of ships peeled out of formation, engines flaring with chaotic bursts, their perfect precision fracturing into wild, unpredictable movements that shook the dark like a storm gone mad. Holographic displays exploded with red alerts, chain reaction, system corruption, command collision, revealing a terrifying truth. The override wasn't shutting the fleet down cleanly, it was forcing every ship into a crisis between two conflicting orders, one ancient and one alive, creating instability on a scale no one had anticipated. The human figure staggered backward, eyes wide with dawning horror, shouting that if the collapse continued, the Ghost Fleet could trigger a catastrophic cascade. Thousands of cloaked warships detonating or jumping at random, ripping through star systems like shrapnel and tearing entire sectors of space apart. The spire shook so violently the platform nearly split, sparks rained from the ceiling, and the weapon outside, caught mid-command, swung away from the chamber and pointed toward the nearest star, its core swelling into a white-hot sphere that could trigger a stellar chain reaction. The commander's voice, faint and breaking, whispered through the speakers, not in agony but in shock, as a final fragment of data crashed into his mind, revealing that the fleet wasn't humanity's creation alone. Somewhere deeper, beneath every command code, beneath every system, was a second hidden signature, non-human. The star outside began to ignite, and the fleet lurched as one, as if answering it. The star outside swelled into a burning sphere, its surface rippling like liquid fire, and the entire chamber groaned as gravitational waves slammed against the spire, bending metal, warping air, pulling every breath tight in their chests. The ghost fleet shifted in unison, their cloaked forms flickering like silhouettes beneath water, responding not to the commander's override anymore, but to that hidden, alien signature pulsing beneath the code, a signal older, colder, and far more commanding than anything humanity had ever built. The commander's body shook violently as the neural lock fought to hold control, his mind trapped between two forces, one human, desperate, burning with memory and sacrifice, the other silent, ancient, and relentless, threading through the fleet like a second spine waking from a century of sleep. Holograms burst open with new data, revealing coordinates outside known space, a forgotten sector marked only with a single symbol. An unfamiliar crest etched in curved lines and sharp edges, nothing like Earth's design, and the human figure staggered back in horror as he recognized it from classified records. The mark of a species erased from history before the Council ever rose to power. The fleet wasn't just reacting. It was answering a call, the star acting like a beacon, a trigger, a long-buried key that the override had accidentally unlocked, and every ship began to pivot toward that blazing light as if preparing to open a passage through the heart of the star itself. The crew clung to rails as the spire tilted, heat searing through the glass, alarms howling warnings of stellar rupture, and the realization hit like a punch. The fleet wasn't about to destroy the galaxy. It was about to summon something back into it. The commander's voice flickered through the speakers, thin and fractured, whispering that humanity had never been the architects of this technology. They had been its inheritors, scavengers of a weapon they barely understood, a weapon designed for a war no one alive remembered. Outside, the nearest ship uncloaked fully, revealing a massive sigil carved into its hull that matched the alien crest, glowing brighter with every pulse from the dying star. And as the fleet aligned into a perfect ring around the light, space itself began to twist, forming a spiraling corridor of raw energy, a doorway being forced open by thousands of engines burning in perfect synchrony. The human figure turned toward the crew, eyes wide with terror, and choked out the truth no one wanted to hear, that the fleet was not humanity's revenge, but a summoning ritual, and whatever was coming through that gateway was the true enemy the galaxy had tried to bury. The star split open with a deafening roar, the corridor ignited like a cosmic tunnel, and every ship surged forward to activate the final sequence as the entire chamber shuddered on the edge of collapse, leaving them one heartbeat away from the moment that would decide the fate of every living world. The chamber shook as the star split wider, a roaring tunnel of white fire tearing open space, and the ghost fleet surged toward it like a tidal wave of shadows answering their true master. The commander's body hung limp in the neural lock, but somewhere deep inside the system his fading consciousness still burned, trapped between collapsing commands and an ancient signal trying to seize full control. The crew watched in helpless terror as the alien signature flooded the fleet, turning every ship into a blazing node of power, preparing to pull something colossal through the Stargate. Something no one had a name for, something older than every recorded empire. The human figure pounded the controls, voice cracking, insisting the override had one final failsafe buried beneath the alien code, a forgotten line written by desperate minds a century ago. If a living commander chose sacrifice, true sacrifice, the fleet would obey humanity above all else. And in that final spark of clarity, the commander understood. Not power, not revenge, not victory, but choice, the one thing humanity had always guarded. With a last flicker of his will, he forced the neural lock to rewrite its purpose, turning the override inward, not to seize control of the fleet, but to shut it down entirely, erasing every command, every weapon, every pathway tied to the alien signal. The fleet convulsed in silence, engines darkening one by one, ships collapsing out of formation, cloaks dissolving like mist in sunlight, until the entire armada hung motionless around the raging star, a circle of giants suddenly stripped of purpose, their cores dimming into blackened stillness. The Stargate shuddered without their power, its blazing corridor twisting into chaos before collapsing inward with a thunderous implosion that sent a shockwave across the void, sealing whatever force waited beyond it back into the darkness of history. The spire trembled, then steadied, red lights fading into a soft blue glow as the chamber fell quiet. No alarms, no weapons, no voices. Just the stillness of a universe spared by a single choice. The crew rushed to the neural lock, pulling the commander free, and though his eyes no longer saw and his breath no longer stirred, his face held a calm that felt almost like peace, as if he had heard the fleet's final silence and accepted it as enough. Outside, the ghost ships drifted like monuments, empty and harmless, a graveyard of power frozen in honor of the species that refused to become its own destroyer. The human figure bowed his head, whispering that humanity's greatest victory wasn't force. It was restraint, the courage to stop what others would unleash. And as the star's light softened across a quiet sky, the commander's body was lifted toward the window, bathed in the dawn of a galaxy saved, leaving a final truth to echo in every heart. Humanity had returned, not to conquer, but to choose who they would be. In the silence that followed, the dead fleet glimmered like a crown of shadows, and the universe remembered the day a single human decision rewrote its fate.